Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is going to be devoted to a slasher movie released during the Golden Age. That is The Prowler. Its alternate title, of course, being Rosemary's Killer, released in 1981. Now, as said many times before on previous podcasts, 1981 to me is the greatest year in the history of slasher movies. It's a year that slasher movie after slasher movie were being released. We had the likes of My Bloody Valentine, The Burning, The Funhouse, Hell Night, and of course The Prowler, among others. Now, The Prowler was directed by Joseph Zito, who I actually think did a great job in directing this movie. It was actually this film that actually garnered attention for him, and it's essentially what landed him the job for directing Friday the 13th Part 4 in 84, which of course is widely regarded by many Friday the 13th fans to be one of the best in the franchise. There are actually some out there that would actually say the best. And what really stands out with The Prowler is, I think right from the get-go, this film kind of stands out in a way. Because, with this film, we get the flashback, that I think, back to kind of World War II time. And it basically kind of makes kind of a sly statement about the stakes of war. The killer in this movie is a war veteran. And I don't think any movie really, not every film could really kind of get away with casting a spurned veteran as the villain. It opens back, the movie opens up in during World War II, and basically a man is being jilted by his girlfriend. She can't wait for him any longer, so basically she ends the relationship via letter. And then, of course, we get the graduation dance. And of course, we learn Rosemary actually gets killed. She's actually got a new partner now. She's moved on, and the killer, obviously the person that she actually jilted, ended the relationship, shows up and kills her and her new lover. And it's a pretty awesome kill actually to start the film off with. It's a double impalement, much like with Friday the 13th Part 2. Which actually came out the very same year. And, in this movie, it does certainly have some parallels to My Bloody Valentine, which, again, came out the very same year. In this movie, we get, in My Bloody Valentine, there's a Valentine's Day dance that has been stopped for years, and then the dance reopens again, triggering the killer. The killer comes back, and in this film, of course, we get the graduation dance, which, again, 1945, when the murders happened, and it actually reopens again in 1980, presumably triggering the killer again. And what really stands out with this movie as well are the top-notch kills, courtesy of Tom Savini. This movie has some great gore effects. And, Tom Savini, I believe, in the actual, in the close-up kills of this movie, it is actually Savini playing the killer himself. It's actually him pulling off the kills, if you will. I believe the assistant director, Peter Gugliano, actually played the Prowler during the majority of the movie. He was doing the kind of the stalking around and the chase scenes. And, of course, spoiler alert, Farley Granger, a very established actor, actually plays the sheriff in this movie. I don't think anyone would really suspect, not a guy you'd actually suspect of being the killer. But it all really kind of adds up. Now, obviously, as I said, an established actor. He was actually in 2 Hitchcock movies, Strangers on a Train in 1951, and of course, Rope a few years before that, 1948. Having someone like Farley Granger in this movie, and I think the 2 lead stars in this film do a perfectly good job, Vicky Dawson and Christopher Geltman. And, what kind of like My Bloody Valentine, I think what stands out with this film is the killer. With My Bloody Valentine, we get a very unique looking killer. The killer's a miner, dressed up as a miner. In this film, the killer is dressed up as a soldier, a GI. using multiple weapons, be it a bayonet, there's even a gun used near the end of the movie, and of course a pitchfork. And as I said, it's really kind of the death scenes in this movie that really stand out. I think the film's handled well. There's some good direction by Joseph Zito. I do believe there's a little kind of a few pacing issues here and there I find in the middle act. The film seems to spend about a third of its running time going through Major Chatham's house and so forth. I'd love to know where Major Chatham got to. Now, Major Chatham is actually the father of Rosemary, the girl who was actually killed in the opening scene of the film. He's wheelchair bound, he's an old man, and but yeah, he's actually seen outside the house in the wheelchair during the film, and we get, wheel tracks. We can see that he's kind of been around. How the hell did he get back in the house? Because I can't actually see a ramp or anything. And he just completely disappears from the movie. And I do believe the film is kind of slightly kind of implying that he may very well be the killer, despite being wheelchair bound and clearly a lot more heavy set than the killer himself. But he actually does a disappearing act in this movie. His name is mentioned many times. He's actually seen on a few occasions, but then he completely disappears from the film. So as to what happened to him, I have no idea. But yeah, the kills in this film really stand out. Tom Savini actually considers these. He considers this film to be his best work. This is his personal favourite of all the films that he actually worked on. And as I said, it was actually him responsible for the kills. Whenever you see someone being killed close up, that is actually Savini himself. And also, the setting of this movie as well, I think, kind of stands out. I believe that originally, Joseph Zito actually wanted it to be shot in Avalon, California, where the film is actually set. But it was actually then decided to shoot the film in Cape May, New Jersey, which he actually felt had a real kind of ghost town quality to it. And I think the film was shot over a period of 6 weeks. Now, it's quite interesting, actually, because there was quite heavy emphasis on the kills in this movie. Much like My Bloody Valentine, it has some real lingering kills. The kills don't cut away. The camera really kind of exploits these murders for every second it can get. And, it's certainly one of the more hardcore slasher movies of its time. And, like I said, much with My Bloody Valentine, it has a killer that really kind of, I feel, stands out in this film. And it's interesting because there was such an emphasis on the kills in this film, is that apparently entire days of shooting would just be focused on a kill. One kill itself, they basically take an entire day out to actually kind of perfect that kill. And with this movie as well, I believe that it was actually re-released to a handful of... I mean, this is a film that didn't do well commercially. This film really didn't do very well at the box office. But it has actually gone on to achieve a cult following. Among slasher movie fans out there, this is regarded as being one of the very best of its time. And I believe there was a handful of theatres where this film was released under the title of Pitchfork Massacre that I didn't even know about until quite recently. And it's actually unknown who the distributor was, if they'd even legally acquired the rights to the film. Just talking about the film itself, as I said, similarities to My Bloody Valentine in terms of, there's a dance, the dance is cancelled because of a tragic event, the dance reopens, presumably, triggering the killer, and, in this movie, obviously it's the case of a jilted lover. I actually love the scenes where you actually see the killer dressing up in the costume. They're lacing their boots, they butting it up to the top, they're putting the bayonet in place. I just love them shots. And obviously the film has a few stalk and chase scenes as well. I've got to say the lead girl, played by Vicky Dawson, doesn't have much luck in getting through doors in this movie. We actually get a chase scene quite early on in this film, actually, that's typically a lot earlier than we usually get chase scenes in slasher movies. And, there's actually an awesome death, in fact, in the shower, which is, clearly kind of a nod to Psycho. I think Joseph Zito is, in a way, kind of, paying homage to Psycho here. It's great. As I said, a top-notch kill, great practical effects. And, shortly before her death, her boyfriend is killed, which, again, is an awesome death. The bayonet being plunged down into the guy's head, it comes through his throat, and the pied de resistance, just to kind of add to it, as if that wasn't enough, the eyeballs rolling back to the head. It's top work by Tom Savini. And there's also another death that really stands out in this film as well, that's actually used on the poster. It's where her name is escaping me. She's kind of the whorish character of the movie, and she's kicked into the pool. She's in the pool, she's kicked into the pool, which I believe took many takes to actually do. She's kicked into the pool, and of course the killer comes up from the water and actually cuts her throat with a bayonet, and you just see the blood trickling down. And again, the movie really focuses quite heavily on these kills. It's not like a quick cutaway or anything like that. It really kind of lingers on the deaths in this movie. And to quickly get on to like the identity of the killer, this isn't a film that throws many suspects or anything into the mix. And for the people out there that are extremely observant, during the flashback scene back in 1945, we hear the name George mentioned. Just kind of a passing comment, if you will. Now, if you put two and two together, George is actually the name of the spurned lover, and the name of the sheriff in the movie is George, and his name actually gets mentioned probably 5 or 6 times during the course of the film. You actually see George on his name badge, and it's actually on his desk. But still, it's something that kind of takes you by surprise, because a lot of people probably wouldn't have picked up on the fact that George is actually the name of the lover, the jilted soldier. And I think certainly for its time, it's quite bold to kind of, a hero, a national hero, somebody that goes off to war, but then essentially ends up as the villain of the movie. Now, of course, like I said, there's kind of a nod to Psycho with the shower scene. There's definitely some echoes of Halloween here as well, with the tampering of the grave. They actually go to visit the grave of Rosemary, and one of the victims of the movie has actually been placed in there, with her cut throat, and there's a fresh rose. There's a rose given with the victims, and again, kind of Halloween. Michael Myers obviously tampers with Judith's grave, actually removing the gravestone. And of course, Annie is actually placed on the bed. Again, she had her throat cut also. So there's definitely some kind of like slight echoes and nods to Halloween here. And of course, there's a cheap jump scare in the film. That's clearly a nod to 1976's Carrie, a film that I love, still to this day, one of the best Stephen King adaptations out there. Very deftly directed by Brian De Palma. There's a cheap jump scare moment where, at the end of the movie, she goes to actually, see the bodies in the shower, and his name's escaping me, but the victim that actually had the bayonet plunged through his head actually comes to life and grabs her. It's just a real kind of, as I said, kind of a nod to Carrie and Friday the 13th, if you will, as well, with Jason, Jason jumping out of the lake, which I'm sure had a lot of popcorn flying back in 1980 when it was released. So I think Joseph Zito actually does a really good job in generating suspense for this movie. He, whilst making some little nods here and there, but it's not bashing you across the head with them or anything like that. I think what he's made is an effectively good slasher movie. Like I said, I do feel like the film kind of plods along a little bit at kind of a slow pace in the kind of middle act, but it doesn't ruin the movie to any great degree. And I think, to be honest, with the end of this movie as well, we actually get, a top-notch Tom Savini effect here, with, the killer reveal being Farley Granger actually having his head blown off. Otto arrives out of nowhere and actually shoots the killer. I'd love to know where Otto came from, if he's discovered the art of teleportation by Michael Myers, but he just kind of comes out of nowhere and shoots the killer. Of course, we always know the killers in these films aren't exactly easy to kill, and he actually shoots Otto, who I believe, could possibly be a suspect for some people out there. I don't know. But then, of course, Farley Granger, the killer, George, actually gets shot himself, the final girl, and his head blown off, which again is another scene very reminiscent of Tom Savini's prior film, which was Maniac, which again has a great exploding head scene. I think one of the best effects by Tom Savini is Tom Savini himself actually having his head blown off. There's a scene in this movie actually as well that kind of stands out to me as well because of the importance of it. It's where Mark, played by Christopher Gallman, is actually trying to get hold of the sheriff. Now, the sheriff leaves very early on in this film for a fishing trip. Okay, so he's basically absent for the entire movie, aside from the first few minutes of the film. And he's trying to contact him, tell him about there's been murders. And he phones up the cabin where he's supposed to be stopping at. And we have what's quite simply one of the laziest men ever put to film. A guy that clearly can't be arsed in going to the cabin. And, he makes out that he's gone to check the cabin. He sits there, he puts the phone down, and he makes out he's walked out. He slams the door against the wall, giving him the impression that, he's actually gone to check. And he just sits there in silence for a minute or so. Had he have gone to that cabin, he would have realised that George wasn't there. And that would have certainly told the audience that George could be the killer, that George may very well be the killer. But the fact is he doesn't. So we assume that George is in the cabin. And I think it's a clever little move, actually. The fact that the guy doesn't check, which just leads us to believe that George is in the cabin. This guy's just too goddamn lazy to get off his arse. But yeah, that would have given the game away. So I quite like how they actually do that, to be honest. And speaking of Farley Granger, I believe he was actually cast in the film because the wife of one of the film's investors just actually happened to be taking an acting class with him. And as I said, kind of during the middle act, we do actually spend quite a long time at Major Chatham's house, which was actually a museum. I think the furniture in the house was all antique, and the owners would only allow the skeleton crew to kind of shoot inside that location. I still don't know why Mark didn't actually check in the room that had the light on. I mean, you go into a dark house, it's kind of like, surely the room with the light on, you'd at least investigate, you'd at least look in there. And also the kind of significance of Rosemary's body. I don't quite understand. I mean, it's there as a jump scare tactic. Anyone that's into slasher movies knows that quite often in these films, the trope is the killer's body, the victim's bodies jump up for jump scares later on in the film, be it through a window or hanging down from a tree or whatever. But she's actually been put up the chimney and she actually comes down. I'm not quite sure why that was done, aside from the fact, obviously, it kind of adds as a jump scare and so forth. But I think, also with this movie as well, we get a scene near the end, the kind of the hide and chase scene, a stalk. It really does seem to take Farley Granger a hell of a long time to find her. We're in a room that's not really massive, and she's just kind of hiding under this bed. I mean, if you were the killer, surely you'd topple over that bed. We're in a room that's got loads of furniture that's clothed and stuff, but it seems to take the killer forever to get through this small room. But again, it's really there for suspense, which I think Joseph Zito actually does a really good job of. And I believe as well with this movie is that there are actually cut versions out there that do actually exist. And the uncut version is the version to watch. You watch a movie like this to see the gore effects. You want to see the kills in all their glory. And I definitely think that it's certainly one of the gorier and I think one of the more notable slasher films of the era, thanks largely to the kills courtesy of Tom Savini and the look of the killer, which I think that the killer is quite creepy looking, I believe that Farley Granger as well, getting back to the head shooting scene, actually he had a real tough time with a cast of his face actually being made, because apparently he was actually claustrophobic and they had to encase his entire head to make the plaster cast, and he actually hated it. It actually caused him a lot of discomfort. And, you know, getting back to the pool scene as well, which, you know, I think is great. I think that actually it was something like 17 or 18 takes to actually do. Now, there's actually a couple in this film that actually kind of sneak off to, you know, get it on, if you will. But we never actually see them again. You'd actually put money on these two teens actually becoming victims, but they're never actually seen again in this film. You know, and yeah, I think the Prowler, I think generally speaking, I think it's a really good slasher film. I think what probably stops me from liking it just a little bit more is kind of some of the pacing issues in kind of the middle act. It doesn't ruin the film at all. As I said, you know, I think this film has generally got a good dose of suspense. I think the two lead characters in this film are perfectly likeable as well. It really isn't badly acted as well. I mean, you've got to think, you know, slasher movies were being churned out left, right and centre at this time. And there was a lot of bad ones, but The Prowler isn't one of them. Definitely not. But it's good to see that it does actually have, you know, a bit of a cult following in this film, you know, for this movie. And yeah, I think as well with The Prowler, the music. I think the music's really well done. It's a very kind of understated score. You know, it's not a score that's like iconic. It's not Halloween or Friday the 13th or anything like that. But the score does actually do a good job of complementing the movie. So I think, you know, if you want a slasher movie that's got a kind of cool slash creepy looking killer, a film with some great gore effects. I mean, I think Tom Savini is pretty much kind of on the top of his game with this film. So yeah, that's pretty much all I really wanted to talk about regarding The Prowler. And again, it's not a slasher movie that's overtly sexual either. This isn't a film that has characters, you know, getting it on left, right, and centre. By no means. As I said, there's one kind of whorish character in the movie, if you will, but it just manages to be a pretty effectively suspenseful slasher film that I'm just glad does actually have a fan base out there, because it doesn't really seem to be talked about a huge amount, certainly not compared to My Bloody Valentine, which I would put My Bloody Valentine just above it, but to me there's not really a massive gap between the two. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about regarding The Prowler. So yeah, thanks to everyone that listened. I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. And take care. And if you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, Talk and Stalk. Thanks a lot.